Because Transfigure Gems have kind of been a theme for Affliction League, in Week 4, I wanted to highlight 4 more Transfigure Gems that are worth keeping an eye on. Now, these aren't things that are well established and part of a meta. In fact, some of these might never become part of a meta. But they have some cool ideas, people are using them in interesting ways, and I think they're worth giving a second look. And so with that in mind, let's take a look. But before we do, a quick reminder to get subscribed and leave a like while you're down there if you're looking forward to what build I'm going to be playing next. Spoiler alert, I'm going to be leveling it very soon, probably right after I finish editing this video. And so without further ado, let's get into it. First up, we have a good old int stack wonder with Kinetic Bolt of Fragmentation. Now, normal Kinetic Bolt is a little bit difficult to use because when it changes directions, it's awkward, hard to aim, and that leads to the skill having dead zones, where you miss enemies because they're standing in just the wrong spot. Luckily, Kinetic Bolt of Fragmentation works a little bit differently, and is a little less clear-focused and more single-target focused, with the projectiles only changing direction 2 times, assuming you don't add forks. But the projectiles can shotgun, assuming that you're able to get them to bounce back to the original target, like if you're wearing the Nimbus ring. So, if you like the whole KB Wonder thing, and you wanted a single target skill that wasn't Power Siphon, I think Kinetic Bolt of Fragmentation is worth looking into. Because the skill gains a massive benefit for stacking spell damage, it's kind of perfect for int stack, since the weapon, as you can see, lightning damage to attacks per intelligence, and increased spell damage per 16 intelligence, which is effectively 2.5% per 16 attack damage. Now, one thing that I'll admit I'm a little rusty on in terms of my stacker mechanics is the Crown of Eyes. I genuinely forget if the increases and reductions double dips with Kinetic Bolt of Fragmentation, or if this is merely a convenient way to get +1 power charge, because we're also stacking those, and some easy leech. Because yes, we've got some Ralakesh's and Malakai's loop, so you pretty much get full max power charges. No Badge of Brotherhood for Frenzies though, because this amulet is absolutely disgusting. Even more damage per intelligence, and then double increased attributes. I kind of don't want to know how much this thing cost. I just know it's a lot. This is a double influenced simplex amulet, which means at some point in the process, a simplex amulet was destroyed to create this, and you only have one other mod slot, and none of these mods are easy to target. So, first of all, huge congrats on making this simplex. It's disgustingly insane. And second of all, if I was to play the build, I'd probably go for an Eyes of a Great Wolf. It's not nearly as good, but hey, it gets you most of the way there. Also, something else that I really like is this is a trickster. Now, int stack Wander was typically played on either Assassin or Deadeye. The problem with both of those is they're all damage 0 defense. And int stack is, well, you get yes, but no damage mitigation. So all damage 0 defense, which would lead to a relatively squishy character. Now we have easy access to spell suppression, so I'm going to guess that this build is pretty close to capped. I'm not 100% sure if they're actually capped, but they've got a good bit, especially with Spellbreaker. Then also, easy access to even more leech from Soul Drinker. And yes, Overleech, which feels really, really good. Trust me, it feels amazing. And if you haven't ever played a Soul Drinker build, you should play a Soul Drinker build. Plus, of course, we've got Polymath. You go around the tree, you grab a bunch of notables, and you get a ton of damage. Because for each different type of mastery, this whole list here, you get more damage. So I really like this setup. I think it's pretty cool. And it does a good job of leveraging things that were only possible in this league. Because you didn't get something like a That Which Was Taken that you could use to cap out your suppress. Or a bunch of charms that you can use to cap out your suppress and skills fire an additional projectile. I mean, who needs Deadeye when you just have +2 proj as everyone? So will this trickster be playable next league? Probably not. This is very much a play it while it lasts kind of build. But it's a really cool one It leverages some interesting mechanics, and I wouldn't be surprised if a strength stacking Kinetic Bolt of Fragmentation is perfectly viable next league, with a greater availability cut. And with a greater availability of Replica Alberon's Warpath from Heist, I could see that being pretty darn affordable, especially if you play it on a jug. Oh, and way tankier than most stacking builds. Next up, we have Lightning Conduit of the Heavens. Now, normally, Lightning Conduit requires you to shock an enemy and scale shock effect. Otherwise, it's not going to do any damage. But Lightning Conduit of the Heavens removes the shock effect requirement, raises the effectiveness of added damage, caps the targets at around 14, and increases the cast time, but removes the trigger penalty. So you could easily play this as a cast on crit build. Now, I saw a lot of setups using this with Impulses and Shock Prolif, and I'm sure that works pretty well. If you fire at 14 random enemies within the radius, some will be left alive. That's fine, the shock explosions kill them instantly. Here's the problem. Most Impulses setups are very, very squishy, because they kind of go all in on damage. So I wanted something that was a little bit more well-rounded. And I do mean a little bit here, because you could go a lot more defensive. But hey, at least we're capping spell suppression. Now, personally, I'd like to see a bit higher evasion. I'd like to see a blood notch in here, and I'd probably scale a little bit of block, but maybe that's just me. You could even go an Elevore. I could very much see an Elevore working perfectly on this build. However, again, the cool part of this concept is in the defensive framework. I mean, we kind of know how that works, and you could always swap things around. The cool part is the Lightning Conduit of the Heavens, and the fact that it enables a very different playstyle, where you don't have to worry about crazy shock scaling. It's a little bit, but it's not like we're stacking a ton of non-damaging ailment or shock effect, and the build doesn't need to. Again, charms, mana reservation efficiency, life regeneration. The recovery here should feel absolutely wonderful. But beyond that, we're not scaling all that much. And of course, a Mage Blood so that you can have your flasks up all the time. Now, the interesting part about Ashes of the Stars here is the quality for Lightning Conduit of the Heavens is that it hits more targets. So the higher your gem quality, the more targets you can affect with a skill. And it affects things within its 4-meter radius. For reference, when people say my RF radius is really big, they mean about 3 meters. That 3 to 3.5 meters is a pretty big RF. 4 meters is a quite generous base radius, meaning this build will clear really, really well. So I could even see, with a little more tech, some sort of zoomy mapper being played on this kind of setup. Or you can go Spellblade Energy Blade, cast on crit, and don't worry about your defenses, because now your damage scales your defenses, and your defenses scale your damage. So that's what I wanted to highlight here. In terms of the Ascendancy choice, all that, I think it's pretty standard, to be honest. The Elementor part with Golem scaling is a little interesting. We haven't seen that too much, but it used to be very, very popular, and it is a good way to get the amount of life recovery you need to permanently run Righteous Fire. So I completely understand why that decision's being made. And again, it's not super tanky. Like, you're not going to tank Uber bosses or anything like that. But for a nice, pretty speedy mapper, I could see this feeling really good, especially with the bonuses from Ralakesh, which are insanely strong, and that's why you're seeing them in so many builds. We also have Ethereal Knives of the Massacre. It's the EK you know and love, but with even more projectiles and in a Nova, so the EK you know and love, but objectively better. Kind of. The cast speed is a little lower, so for self-cast builds, you'd be trading a bit of single target damage for even more clear. However, a lot of people are playing it as EK Ignite. If you're playing it as Ignite, you don't need to worry about that, because you're only casting once per pack, and then the Ignite Prolif handles the rest. But that isn't the only way to play it. We've got a Chaos version here on Assassin, a absolutely disgusting looking, but very, very glassy looking Cold Conversion, and we even have a Pure Fire Inquisitor. Let's take a look at this guy. He's doing something cool. When you get a Circle of Anguish so good that you say fuck it, and you just mirror it with Kalandra's Touch. Oh, I love that. Also, if you ever wanted to mirror a ring, this is the league to do it. Kalandra's Touch is super cheap, because it's a relatively common drop given the insane Magic Find potential Wildwood has. Oh, and everyone's playing actual Magic Find too. And we've got a Leadership's Price for a ton of max fire res. Pretty standard gear if is taken as a Cloak of Flame, one of my favorite fairly low level uniques, since it's so easy to get for double corruption and it provides a ton of defensive value. And a Dawnbreaker for even more Fizz taken as. This guy doesn't take physical damage, by the way. Got a Progenesis, so this is way tankier than it looks. And we're even going Blood Notch. Now, this is very important. He has Eldritch Battery. Why do you want Eldritch Battery? Because otherwise, your ES is going to prevent you from getting stunned. And if you want to know more about that, check out my recent video where I talk about the Blood Notch setup and why having no ES is so important. Looks like there's also Purity of Fire for Cold and Lightning taken as fire. And Leadership under Rakiata. Is that tempered by war? I forget, but I think so, and it wouldn't make sense to actually have agnostic. So I'm pretty sure that's tempered by war. So never mind. When I said this guy doesn't take physical damage, what I meant to say is this guy doesn't take non-fire or chaos damage. Because we're getting 30% here, we're getting 50% here, and we're getting 20% here. Oh, it's a perfect Dawnbreaker. That's beautiful. That's 100% of Fizz, Cold, and Lightning taken as fire. So all you need is a bit of Chaos Res, and you're good to go. And there we go. Chaos Res on the boots, Chaos Res on the gloves, Chaos Res on the helmet. Yeah, we've got Chaos Res too. Really cool setup. I like the defensive framework. This almost feels like a hardcore build to me, but it's a hardcore build that you'd feel pretty good playing in softcore. In fact, this is almost a modified version of a setup that I remember seeing Dan play in the past. I guess this is the league where everyone's builds look like Dan builds. His can't get any better. They're already pretty much perfect. We've just all been able to start to kind of catch up, but not really. We still can't catch up because Dan is great. And last up, on top of all the fun transfigured gems, Steel Skills also got reworked. Now, if you remember episode 1, then we talked about Splitting Steel, which got a lot of attention for being a very good league starter. And now I want to talk about Lancing Steel of Spraying. It's proving to be a quite versatile skill, because we've got a Tri-Ellie build, just kind of killing people with the actual Lancing Steel, a whole bunch of Spellblade cast on crit setups, taking advantage of the fact that it fires in sequence and fires a lot of projectiles. Plus it's kind of automated, so you tap it and you move on, you tap it and you move on, making it feel much, much better than Barrage. And you don't need to slow yourself down the way you would with Cyclone, and you don't need to use a bow the way you would with Blast Rate. It's kind of a best of all worlds, which is really, really cool. Oh look, a Pure Fizz version, and we've even got Poison Lancing Steel of Spraying. But I want to look at this guy. All right, so Void Forge for Weapon Fizz is extra. Of course, Lancing Steel is Spraying with Trinity. Fitting in all the auras. Let's just go with all the auras. Arrogance, so we're Petrified Blood. Yes, we are Petrified Blood. Good bit of armor. That's going to help. An Eternal Damnation, very nice. And the downside of Eternal Damnation is -5% to all max res. But if your resistances are 78, then that's not a downside. This very much looks like a Transcendence setup to me. Though we're using possibly Strength of Blood, depending on where it's allocated. It could be that this is actually Elemental Equilibrium, or more likely, it is actually Strength of Blood. I'd have to pull this into POB to know for sure, because Pure Ninja doesn't support gems. Either way, there's some very interesting stuff going on here, and it's a pretty neat take on the build. Void Forge is a very cool item that I've always kind of wanted to use, but never quite found an excuse to. And Eternal Damnation is great in any build. Normally it comes with a small downside, where you get a bunch of elemental damage mitigation, but all of your resistances, including chaos, are lowered. So you wear Lore Weave to counteract that. And again, if you have Transcendence, your armor would no longer apply to Fizz, so you'd really want a 100% of Fizz taken as elemental, which isn't being done here. But I could very much see that working as well, and it would be a lot tankier, though it might be lower damage. Then again, I suspect this 4.3 mil isn't actually 4.3 mil. I think that's one projectile at most, not counting everything you get from Sniper's Mark, not counting all the secondary projectiles. Yes, hits after the first on each enemy deal 90% less damage, but you're still going to be firing a whole bunch of projectiles in sequence, which then also split off, assuming you're hitting other targets, or assuming you enable return, which could actually be good here. So it's going to have quite a bit of damage and be a really cool setup. Personally, though, I'm probably never actually going to play that. Honestly, I'm probably going to play something like this, because I did play an energy build similar to this before. I did not have the advantage of these awesome charms that are so much power. So I didn't have the insane 31,000 energy shield. And it was super awesome even back then. I can only imagine the power of this build, and I genuinely wouldn't be surprised if this build got nerfed because it was strong before and it got nothing but a ton of buffs. I am really curious how the cast on crit triggers feel if Lancing Steel is spraying. It should be really good. I'm definitely going to try that in the future. Get subscribed if you want to see it, and maybe try to guess what skill I'll cast when I crit. So I would say that Kinetic Bolt of Fragmentation, Lightning Conduit of the Heavens, Ethereal Knives of a Massacre, and of course, Lancing Steel of Spraying are 3 transfigured gems to watch. I don't think any of them are going to take over the meta yet. I also don't think that Blade Trap of Greatswords is going to take over the meta yet. I do think it's worth watching, but I'm going to hold off judgment on that one, because I'm not sure how much its current playability is reliant on things that only exist here and now in Affliction League, and how much will persist afterwards when we lose the super insane power of charms. Stay tuned for that. But I'm also equally sure that we've barely scratched the surface, that all the builds we're looking at now are just a fraction of what people are going to create over the next few leagues. So be sure to stay tuned for the next meta report, which will come in 3.24 and talk about whatever's dominating at the time. And so now I'm curious, have you played or messed around with any transfigured skill that you feel is really strong and hasn't been solved yet? If so, let me know down in the comments below, and who knows, if I look into it and really like it, maybe I'll end up doing something with it. And if you're looking for something else to watch, well, you can check out last week's meta report, or for week 2, or for week 1. There's been pretty much a non-stop stream of transfigured gems being mentioned, and my next build is going to feature one as well. So do be sure to check those out, or read more over at Maxwell.gg, where I go into some of the specific item synergies for the builds that I highlighted today. Links to those will be up in the card and down below. With that said, I'd like to take a moment to give special thanks to my patrons and channel members for their continued support. For as low as $1 a month, you can help make videos just like this one possible. And of course, thank you to everyone who watched to the end. I have a lot of fun making the meta reports. It started as this small little side project, and it's grown into a thing that I've been able to maintain for at least 3 leagues now, and hopefully many more. So I hope you learned something, and I'll see you again sometime soon.